August 29, 1857, Beardstown, Illinois. A crowd of 2,000 people packed the courthouse. They came to see a man hang. Not me. I was the defense attorney. They came to see my client, William Duff Armstrong, swing from the gallows for murder. The evidence was overwhelming. 3 eyewitnesses swore they saw him kill a man with a single blow to the head. The prosecution had the murder weapon, a slungshot, a heavy piece of lead wrapped in leather. They had motive. They had opportunity. They had the crowd screaming for blood. My client had already confessed to his lawyer, his previous lawyer, who quit the case in disgust. Duff told him he did it, told him he was guilty as sin, and I got him acquitted. In 10 minutes. Not because I lied, not because I cheated, because I found the one piece of evidence everyone else missed, because I understood something about truth that the prosecution never considered, because I was willing to look stupid, ridiculous even, to save an innocent man's life. This is the story of how one murder trial transformed me from a backwoods lawyer into the most famous attorney in Illinois, and how it taught me the power of asking the one question nobody else thought to ask. It started with a drink, as these things often do. August 29, 1856, exactly 1 year before the trial. A camp meeting in Mason County, Illinois. Religious revival, tents, preaching, the whole spectacle. But outside the sacred ground, in the grove nearby, a different kind of gathering. James Preston Metzger and Charles Allen were drinking whiskey, heavily. They got into an argument, over what nobody clearly remembered. Voices rose. Pushing started. And then, according to 3 witnesses, a man stepped out of the shadows and struck Metzger in the head with a slungshot. Metzger fell. He didn't get up. He lingered for 2 days, delirious, vomiting, his skull fractured. Then he died. The witnesses were certain. It was Duff Armstrong. They saw him. They knew him. Charles Allen, the man fighting with Metzger, swore it was Armstrong who delivered the fatal blow. Duff was arrested immediately. He was 24 years old. Known as a rough character, a drinker, a fighter. The son of Jack Armstrong, a famous pioneer and my old friend from New Salem days. Jack Armstrong was dead by then, but his widow Hannah came to me, begged me. "Abe, you knew Jack. You know my boy isn't a murderer. Please, please help us." I should have said no. Not because I thought Duff was guilty, though I suspected he might be, but because I was exhausted. I was 48 years old, riding the circuit constantly, away from Mary and the boys for weeks at a time. I was politically active, preparing for the Senate race against Douglas that would come the next year. I didn't need a hopeless murder case. But Hannah reminded me of something. In New Salem, when I was a young man with no money and no friends, Jack Armstrong had taken me in, fed me, treated me like family when nobody else would. "I owe Jack," I told her. "I'll take the case." I read the evidence. It was devastating. 3 eyewitnesses. Charles Allen, the man who had been fighting with the victim, swore he saw Armstrong strike the blow by moonlight. He was close enough to see clearly, he said, close enough to be certain. Another witness, Norris, corroborated him. Said he saw Armstrong with the slungshot before the fight. And Metzger himself, before he died, had allegedly identified Armstrong as his killer. Plus, there was the slungshot, found in Armstrong's possession. A heavy piece of lead in a leather pouch, exactly the kind of weapon that could fracture a skull with one blow. Duff's previous lawyer had quit because Duff confessed to him, told him he did it, told him he was drunk, angry, didn't mean to kill anyone, but yes, he struck the blow. I confronted Duff in his cell. Did you do it?" He looked me in the eye. "Mr. Lincoln, I was dead drunk. I don't remember nothing. But if I did it, I deserve to hang." Not exactly a ringing declaration of innocence. But something bothered me. The timeline, the medical evidence. Metzger had lingered for 2 days, and the doctor said he died from a blow to the back of the head, not the front, where a face-to-face assailant would strike. And there was another suspect, a man named James Norris, the same Norris who testified against Duff. He had been seen with a slungshot that night, too. He had motive, he hated Metzger, and he had lied about his whereabouts. But the prosecution wasn't interested in James Norris. They had their killer. They had 3 eyewitnesses. They had a confession to a previous lawyer. They had a community hungry for justice. My job wasn't to prove who did it. My job was to create reasonable doubt, to show that the evidence against Duff wasn't as solid as it appeared. To do that, I needed to destroy the eyewitness testimony. And to do that, I needed to understand something about moonlight. Charles Allen was the key witness, the prosecution's star. Without him, the case collapsed. Allen testified that he saw Armstrong strike Metzger by the light of the moon. High moon, bright moon, close enough to see clearly. He was absolutely certain. I watched him testify, confident, sincere, believable. The jury was eating it up. And I thought, what if he's telling the truth about what he remembers, but his memory is wrong? I had spent years on the circuit, traveling at night, sleeping under the stars. I knew the moon. I knew its phases, its movements, its brightness at different times of the month. August 29th, 1856. I needed to know what the moon was doing that night. I sent to Springfield for an almanac. The 1856 almanac. The specific one, from that specific year. It arrived the night before my cross-examination. I opened it with shaking hands. Found August. Found the 29th. And I laughed. The moon that night was in its first quarter. It was low in the sky. At 11 p.m., the time of the killing, it was barely visible and setting rapidly. There was no bright moonlight. There was barely enough light to walk by, let alone identify a face from a distance. Allen had lied. Not deliberately. He had convinced himself he saw what he saw. But he couldn't have seen it. It was physically impossible. I had him. I had the prosecution. I had the case. But I needed to be careful. If I just announced this in my closing argument, the prosecution would claim I was using a fake almanac, that I had manufactured evidence. I needed them to hand me the weapon. The trial lasted 8 days, longer than most circuit court cases. The crowd grew every day. Farmers, merchants, families with picnics, all come to see the show. The prosecution presented their case methodically. The eyewitnesses, the slungshot, the dying declaration. They were confident, too confident. When my turn came, I called character witnesses first. People who knew Duff, knew he wasn't a killer. People who knew the Armstrong family, knew their reputation. I was building sympathy before I attacked the evidence. Then I called Duff himself. Risky, very risky. But I needed him on the stand to deny the confession to the previous lawyer, to look the jury in the eye and say, I didn't do it. He did well, sincere, scared, young. The jury saw a boy, not a killer, but the real work came in cross-examination. I went after the medical evidence first, got the doctors to admit that Metzger's skull fracture was on the back of the head, inconsistent with a face-to-face blow. Got them to admit that he could have been struck from behind by someone else. Then I went after Norris, the other suspect. I showed he had lied about his whereabouts, showed he had his own slingshot, showed he had reason to want Metzger dead. The prosecution laughed at me. Desperate tactics, they called it, trying to blame an innocent man to save a guilty one. Maybe, but I was creating doubt. That's all I needed. Then came Charles Allen, the star witness, the man who saw everything. I approached him slowly, friendly at first, established that he was certain, absolutely certain of what he saw, that he had excellent eyesight, that he was close enough to see clearly. Then I asked, "You saw this by moonlight?" "Yes." "Bright moonlight?" "Very bright, high in the sky." "You're certain of the time?" 11 o'clock, maybe a few minutes after. I walked to my table, picked up the almanac, held it behind my back. "Mr. Allen, are you familiar with the phases of the moon?" He wasn't. Of course he wasn't. He was a farmer, not an astronomer. "Do you know what the moon was doing on August 29th, 1856? "I know it was bright." I produced the almanac, opened it to August 1856, showed the jury. "Your Honor, I introduced the 1856 almanac into evidence. Mr. Allen, would you read what it says about the moon on August 29? He couldn't read it. He was illiterate, so I read it for him. On August 29, 1856, the moon was in its first quarter. It set at 11:57 p.m. At 11 p.m. it was low in the western sky, barely visible, providing minimal illumination. Silence in the courtroom. "Mr. Allen," I continued, my voice gentle now, almost sympathetic. "If the moon was setting, low in the west, barely visible, how could you see clearly enough to identify a man's face? From a distance? In the shadows?" He stammered. I must have been mistaken about the time. It was earlier, when the moon was higher." "But you said 11 o'clock. You were certain. You built your entire testimony on that certainty." And if you were wrong about the moon, Mr. Allen, what else might you be wrong about?" I let the question hang, sat down. The prosecution had no rebuttal. They hadn't checked the almanac. They had assumed Allen's certainty meant accuracy. Never assume certainty means accuracy. That's the lesson I want you to remember. I gave my closing argument. Not long. I'm known for long speeches, but this one was short. I didn't need to be long. I had already won. I held up the almanac. This is the only witness that never lies. The moon. It was there. It saw what happened. And it says Mr. Allen could not have seen what he claims he saw. I talked about reasonable doubt, about the presumption of innocence, about the horror of executing an innocent man while the real killer walks free. I looked at the jury. 12 farmers, 12 men who understood moonlight, who had worked by it, who knew I was telling the truth. "Find him not guilty," I said. "Not because you know he didn't do it, but because you cannot know he did. And that doubt is enough. That doubt is everything." They deliberated for 10 minutes. 10 minutes. The shortest murder deliberation in Illinois history. Not guilty. The crowd erupted. Some cheered, some booed. Hannah Armstrong fainted. Duff wept. I didn't celebrate. I packed my bag, shook Duff's hand, and prepared to ride to the next town. The circuit didn't stop. Justice for one client meant injustice for the next if I was late. But something had changed. That trial made me famous. Not just known, famous. Newspapers wrote about Lincoln's almanac defense. People told the story in taverns and parlors across Illinois. When I ran for Senate the next year, when I ran for president 2 years after that, people remembered. But here's what they should remember. I didn't win because I was clever. I won because I was prepared, because I checked the almanac when nobody else thought to, because I understood that the obvious truth isn't always the real truth. I won because I was willing to look foolish, cross-examining a witness about the moon of all things, to find the one fact that mattered. In your life, you'll face moments where everyone is certain, where the crowd sees one thing and demands you agree, where the evidence seems overwhelming and the verdict seems foregone. Check the almanac. Ask the stupid question. Look for the inconvenient fact. Be willing to stand alone against the crowd even when it costs you, even when they laugh, even when they hate you for it. The truth is worth it. Justice is worth it. And sometimes, just sometimes, that willingness to question the obvious is what changes everything. I'm Abraham Lincoln. I defended a guilty-looking man with a stupid almanac and saved his life. What will you defend?